In a small town surrounded by old houses and endless fields lived a quiet woman named Maria. To everyone, she was just the cleaner at the community hall. They saw her every day, sweeping, wiping, arranging chairs, but no one really saw her. Maria was a ghost in their busy lives, a simple woman doing an ordinary job. But beneath that quiet exterior, Maria carried a story, a dream that had been locked away for years. When she was a little girl, Maria dreamed of becoming a pianist. Every Sunday at church, the sound of the piano would fill her heart with a warmth she couldn't explain. Her family couldn't afford a real piano, so her father, a man with calloused hands and a big heart, built her a small wooden keyboard with painted keys. Every night, she'd practice on that silent board, imagining herself on a grand stage, the music flowing from her fingertips. That silent music was her entire world. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Her mother fell ill, and her father had to work longer hours. Maria left school to help, and her dream of music began to fade, replaced by the weight of responsibility. Later, she married a kind mechanic named Daniel. He learned of her forgotten dream and promised to save up for a second-hand piano. They were poor, but they were happy, and for a while, the music in Maria's heart began to stir again. Tragically, happiness was fleeting. Daniel was lost in a work accident and Maria's world crumbled. The piano was never bought. The music inside her went silent. Life became a relentless cycle of survival, earning just enough for rent, for food, for one more day. She found work at the community hall, the very place that once represented celebration and joy. She'd watch parties, weddings, and fancy gatherings from the background. People laughed, danced, and celebrated life, while she quietly cleaned up their messes. She never felt jealousy, only a quiet acceptance of her fate. But sometimes in the dead of night, when the hall was empty and silent, she would sit by the old piano in the corner. She'd let her fingers hover over the dusty keys, her eyes closed, playing melodies from memory. Her secret concert for an audience of one. The townspeople saw a plain, unambitious woman. Some even made fun of her quiet nature. But Maria held no bitterness. She believed in kindness above all else, offering a comforting word to the sad and a sweet to the children. Yet a deep sorrow remained. Whenever someone played the piano at an event, the sound that once brought her joy now felt like a sharp pang of what could have been. She'd grip her broom tighter, fighting back tears. Every day was the same. She'd return to her small, quiet room, the ticking clock her only companion. Looking at the stars, she'd whisper to her late husband, "I'm still trying, Daniel." She lived with silent grace, her heart holding a hidden melody, waiting for its moment. Maria didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change. She didn't know that in that very hall her buried talent was about to be discovered, leaving the very people who overlooked her utterly speechless. That evening, the air was colder than usual. Inside the community hall, golden lights danced, reflecting in clinking glasses. Laughter and perfume filled the air. A local businessman was celebrating his success, and the town's self-proclaimed important people were all there. Amidst the glamour, Maria moved like a shadow, her work her only companion. She arranged trays, served drinks, and collected plates, a soft, practiced smile on her face. Her old shoes squeaked softly on the polished floor, a sound she tried to muffle. She was used to disappearing in a crowd, but tonight, the air felt different, sharp with an unspoken arrogance. At a prominent table, a group of elegantly dressed young men and women held court. Their laughter was loud, their jokes aimed at anyone they deemed below them. They openly mocked the servers. Maria tried to keep her distance, knowing their kind, those who built themselves up by tearing others down. But soon, one of the women noticed her. A whispered comment, a ripple of giggles. "Look at her," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "She moves like she's scared of the floor." More laughter. Maria heard them but kept her face serene. Life had taught her tougher lessons. Words, she thought, couldn't break her anymore. In a quiet corner stood an old piano, draped in a cloth, a silent relic of a bygone era. It had belonged to the hall owner's father. The guests noticed it. "Who even keeps a piano in a place like this?" One man scoffed. Another, pointing directly at Maria, joked, "Maybe the cleaner plays it in her free time." The table erupted. Maria froze. The piano. That single word unlocked something deep within her. She tried to turn away, but a voice called out, "Hey, miss, do you play the piano?" She turned, her eyes soft and uncertain. "No, sir, I used to, a long time ago." Her answer was the spark they needed. "Oh, really? Then show us. Let's see the talent of our hall's piano lady." The man's voice was a weapon of mockery. Maria shook her head gently. "I haven't played in many years. I don't think I can." But their minds were made up. They wanted a show, a spectacle at her expense. The host, flushed with drink and eager to please, chimed in with a cruel smile. "Come on, Maria, just one song. Don't be shy. We could all use a laugh." Every eye in the room turned to her. Her hands began to tremble. The thought of playing again after so long was suffocating. It wasn't the fear of playing poorly. It was the flood of memories. Her husband, her dreams, the life she had buried under years of silent survival. But she knew she couldn't refuse. This job was her lifeline. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, she agreed. "All right," she whispered, "just for a moment." Mocking cheers and sarcastic applause followed her as she walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, her old shoes echoing in the suddenly quiet room. The silence wasn't of respect, but of cruel anticipation. Maria gently lifted the cloth. Dust motes danced in the warm light. She ran her fingers over the yellowed keys, a greeting to a long-lost friend. She sat, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. The whispers continued. "Let's see if she even remembers what to do," one said. "She'll probably play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Another snickered. Maria closed her eyes. For a single precious moment, the room, the noise, the cruelty, all vanished. There was only the piano beneath her fingers and the echo of her father's smile, her husband's whisper. "One day, you'll play again." Now that day had come, born not of joy but of humiliation. Yet something deep inside her stirred. The loudest mocker shouted, "Come on, play! We don't have all night." Maria took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys. The room held its breath, ready to laugh. They had no idea. They couldn't know that the humble woman they were mocking was about to show them the true meaning of beauty and dignity. As her trembling fingers touched the first key, the laughter began to die. A new tension filled the air. The melody that was about to unfold would silence every cruel word and awaken something they thought they never had: shame, awe, and wonder. The hall fell into an uneasy silence. The air felt thick like the calm before a storm. Everyone stared at Maria, the simple cleaner, the quiet woman they had mocked only moments ago. The laughter that once echoed through the room now hovered nervously in the air, unsure whether to continue or stop. Maria sat at the piano, her thin hands trembling above the dusty keys. For a brief moment her heart screamed at her to get up and walk away, but something inside her whispered softly, "No, play." It wasn't pride. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, a voice she hadn't heard in years, the voice of the dreamer she once was. She took a deep breath. The noise around her faded away. She could no longer hear the guests, the music from the speakers, or the clinking glasses. All she could hear was the faint rhythm of her own heartbeat. Then, slowly, her fingers pressed the first key. The sound that came out was soft, almost fragile, like a whisper carried by the wind. For a second, the crowd didn't react, but then the melody began to grow. Each note connected to the next, forming a story that words could never tell. Her hands moved gently at first, then faster, more confident, as if they remembered every song she ever loved. The piano seemed to awaken under her touch, singing after years of silence. The music filled every corner of the hall, wrapping around the guests like a wave of emotion. It was not a song of show-off skill or fancy technique, it was pure feeling. You could hear the pain of loss, the beauty of love, and the strength of a heart that had endured everything life threw at it. The same people who laughed earlier now stared in disbelief. Their smiles faded, replaced by wide eyes and trembling lips. A woman in the crowd put her hand to her chest, as if trying to steady her heartbeat. The man who had mocked her the loudest lowered his glass slowly, his arrogant grin gone. Maria was lost in her own world. She was no longer the cleaner, no longer the woman they pitied. She was Maria, the pianist she had always dreamed of being. The memories flowed through her like music. Her father's proud smile, her husband's warm laughter. The nights she sat alone in her room pretending to play on the table. Everything came rushing back. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't stop. The song carried her, lifting her beyond shame, beyond fear. Her fingers glided like water over the keys, each note a piece of her soul being released into the world. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was powerful. It was her truth. The audience was no longer breathing normally. The sound of the piano filled them with emotions they didn't expect to feel that night. Some of them looked away, ashamed of how they had treated her. Others simply stood still, afraid that even blinking might break the magic. As she played, Maria remembered Daniel, her husband, the way he used to watch her with eyes full of love and hope. In her mind, she could almost see him standing at the back of the hall, smiling, whispering, "See? I told you the world would hear you one day." Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from emotion. She finished the melody with a soft, trembling chord, one final note that lingered in the air, fading slowly like a sigh of peace. And then, silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights and Maria's soft breathing. She sat there quietly, her head slightly bowed, her fingers resting gently on the piano. Then from the back of the room, a single clap echoed. It was hesitant at first, then another joined and another. Within seconds, the entire hall was filled with applause. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Maria looked up, confused. She had expected laughter or maybe pity, not this. She blinked, unsure if it was real, but it was. The same people who had mocked her were now applauding her with genuine admiration. The host, who earlier forced her to play, approached with tears in his eyes. "Maria," he said softly, I had no idea." Maria smiled kindly. "It's all right," she said. "Most people never do until they listen." Her words were gentle, but they carried power. She didn't scold them. She didn't boast. Her grace was louder than pride, her forgiveness stronger than anger. For the first time in years, Maria felt alive. She felt seen, not as a cleaner, not as a poor woman, but as someone who had something beautiful to give. That night she walked home under the stars, her steps light and her heart full. She didn't need fame, applause, or praise. She had found what she had lost long ago: her music, her courage, her peace. And as she disappeared down the quiet street, the sound of her piano still echoed in the minds of everyone who heard her. A haunting, beautiful reminder that real talent doesn't need to shout. It only needs one moment of truth to be heard forever. For a few seconds after the music ended, time itself seemed to stop. The air in the hall was thick with emotion, almost sacred. No one moved, no one spoke, as if a single sound might break the fragile magic hanging between them. Maria sat quietly at the piano, her fingers still resting on the keys, her heart beating fast but calm. The echo of the last note seemed to live on, floating gently through the silence. The people who once laughed at her now stood frozen in awe. Their faces, once proud and smug, were now soft and humbled. It was as if the music had peeled away the layers of arrogance that covered their hearts. Some of them had tears glistening in their eyes, though they tried to hide them. The same woman who mocked Maria earlier now looked at her as if seeing her for the very first time, not as a cleaner, not as a nobody, but as someone extraordinary. Maria slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, tired but shining, met theirs, not with anger, not with pride, but with quiet forgiveness. She gave them a small, gentle, and peaceful smile. Then she stood up, her chair creaking softly against the floor. The host of the party was the first to step forward. His voice trembled as he said, "Maria, I don't have words. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Maria looked at him kindly. "It's all right," she said softly. "You didn't have to know. Music speaks when words fail." Her tone was calm, but her words hit deep. People lowered their eyes, ashamed of their laughter, their jokes, their cruelty. They had forced her to play to make fun of her, but she had played to touch their souls, and she did. As she began to walk away, the guests started clapping again, this time not out of excitement, but out of respect. It was slow at first, then stronger, echoing through the hall like thunder. Maria paused for a second and turned around. The people who once saw her as invisible were now standing in her honor. She bowed slightly, not to show pride, but gratitude. Her eyes shimmered under the light, reflecting both sadness and peace. Then, without another word, she quietly left the stage and walked toward the back door. Outside, the night was cold but calm. The stars were scattered like tiny diamonds, and the moonlight spilled across the street like silver paint. Maria took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. The world felt different. Lighter, softer, kinder. She had no riches, no fame, but her heart was full. She had finally played again, not for applause, but for her soul. As she walked home, her mind wandered back to Daniel, her husband. She smiled faintly, whispering to the night, "You see, Daniel? I played again." It felt as though the wind carried his answer back, a soft, invisible hug that wrapped around her. Back at the hall, the guests were still talking about what had just happened. Their laughter was gone, replaced by quiet reflection. One man said, "I can't believe she played like that." Another replied, "I can't believe we mocked her." The host sighed deeply. "We all did. And she still forgave us." The piano sat silently in the corner once more, but something about it felt different, as if it too had come alive that night. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a witness to a miracle, a reminder of humility and grace. Word of Maria's performance spread through the town in the days that followed. People who had never noticed her before began greeting her kindly, offering her smiles and respect. But Maria didn't seek attention. She continued her work just as before, sweeping floors, cleaning halls, helping others. The only difference was the peace in her heart and the quiet pride in her eyes. Sometimes, when the hall was empty, she would sit at the piano again. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played for herself, for her memories, her peace, and her love. Each time, her music seemed to carry a message. Never look down on someone just because they seem ordinary. Every soul carries a melody. You just have to listen. One evening, a little girl from the neighborhood peeked into the hall and saw Maria playing softly. She watched in wonder and asked shyly, "Can you teach me?" Maria smiled warmly and patted the seat beside her. "Of course, my dear. Everyone can make music, you just have to feel it here," she said, gently placing her hand over her heart. And so, a new story began. From that day, the sound of the piano filled the hall often, not with arrogance or show, but with pure joy and kindness. Maria's life didn't suddenly change into fame or wealth, but she became something far greater, a living lesson. People in town spoke of her whenever they talked about humility, courage, and hidden talent. They said, "Do you remember that woman who was mocked but left everyone speechless with her piano? She taught us what real beauty means." And as years passed, her story became a quiet legend, a reminder that greatness often hides behind simplicity, and the most beautiful music comes from the most wounded hearts.